Hello and welcome to the second video in my VTOL build. Again, this is my first VTOL build. Last time I did any VTOL stuff, it was with Ben up at 3DXR. Now Ben is an expert at this stuff and he showed me how he set up his. But as those of you that watch videos on places like YouTube and then try and do it yourself know all too well, watching somebody do it and then doing it yourself for the first time are vastly different experiences. So this one is a learning experience for me. This time it's all about the flight controller. Now I'm using a Pixhawk Cube as I explained in the first video in this series, and the reason I'm doing that is because I want to emulate the build that I did with Ben as closely as I possibly can. For two reasons. One, it allows me to follow the steps that he laid out as closely as possible, and secondly, possibly more importantly, it means if I get stuck I can give Ben a ring and he'll give me a hand. So this video is about setting up that Pixhawk Cube Orange. Now there are a couple of differences between a Pixhawk Cube Orange and some of the other Pixhawk stuff you may have seen in the videos on the channel. For example, these days CANBus is a much more common thing on Pixhawk flight controllers. So one of the things I want to do is spend a bit of time in this video kind of showing you the differences between setting up a Pixhawk Cube and the other stuff on the channel that's now a little bit more out of date, because the Pixhawk Cube Black, the original one, is something that you can't get anymore. One word of caution, if you're thinking of building a VTOL, this isn't the place to start. If you've never done anything with Quadplane before, don't start here, because it's all the complexity of setting up Quadplane, with all the complexity of setting up Quadcopter, with all of the clever complexity that goes in the middle with how all the transitions work. Again, I'm going for the simplest setup in terms of a 4.1 build, and I explained all this in the first video in the series, so if you haven't done anything at all with Quadplane, don't make VTOL your first build would be my advice. Get to grips with that and then you can build on that experience. So in this video I'll go through the latest process for how you set up a Cube flight controller with Pilot. I'm using Mission Planner here. I would recommend you use Mission Planner for setup as well. It's very good at kind of detecting automatically the kind of flight controller you have, and it's much less complicated than it used to be, particularly with things like the Pixhawk Cubes. Also going to go through some of the setup of the CANBus stuff, how you connect them all. It means the wiring is incredibly simple, but there are some things you have to turn on inside Pilot. And finally, again, we'll cover how you enable Quadplane. By the end of this video, we'll be at a stage where I can kind of move on and figure out how to do some of the mechanical things on the model, like fitting the 4 motors underneath the wing roots. So let's jump onto the bench and I'll start the setup process at Timecodes as usual down below. So on the bench we have our Cube Orange. Now this has never been flashed with any operating system, and when we plug it in we should see the LED go red. That'll be showing us that that is absolutely the case. On the computer I have the latest version of Pilot ready to go, and that's going to be what we'll flash and set everything up on. Now there is an extra couple of steps here. All the peripherals that I'm about to plug into this little fella are going to be connected on a CANBus. So the GPS is going to be plugging into this little CANBus here. That's going to be plugging into the flight controller, but even things like the airspeed sensor are all plugging into this one thing. So with one cable into the flight controller, I can connect everything else up. However, that does require an extra couple of steps. So if you've never watched a setup before, hopefully this will be interesting. If you, however, you are a Cube Pixhawk fan and you've already set a number of these things up, this might be interesting because I'm going to show the steps to do all the CAN stuff. Now on the computer, if I just jump onto the web browser, the nice thing is for the pieces that I have, it does say which things you need to change, what the driver and everything for the airspeed sensor. Similarly, this is the manual on the cubepilot.org website for the GPS, and very handily it shows you all the things that you need to change. So we'll have to do that afterwards, but let's not get too ahead of ourselves. First thing we need to do is flash this little fella with Quadplane. So let's plug it in for the very first time. You can see hopefully the LED on there just in that little piece is red. That's showing that this cube hasn't got any operating system on it at all. It's brand new out the box. So here, if we go into Mission Planner and we click down, there we go. We can see that it says COM27 Profile CNC Cube New. So what we need to do is go to Setup tab, and we can install firmware. Now we need to pick on plane. Are you sure you want to upload plane official? Say yes. So let's just unplug and replug the flight control back in. Right, so it's now found. See, it says at the bottom here, found board type on COM27. Cool. Okay, that looks better. Right, let's try this again. Plane 4.2 official. Say yes. And then we'll say the platform. It's a cube orange. And pick the firmware. RD plane. We'll say upload firmware. It'll download everything from the internet, and then it'll flash it across. So now it's programming. Hopefully you can see here the little orange light is still on. And if we go back to Mission Planner, it's just going to work its way away. So flashing it is exactly the way you'd flash any other real flight controller with this, but it does kind of figure it out nicely which cube it is in the latest versions of Mission Planner, which makes everything a little bit easier. Right, now we have lots of different lights flashing on it. Let's see if we can connect. Now we should see two serial devices. One is going to be for the flight controller. The other one is going to be for a pass-through to talk to CANBus peripherals. We need the first one usually. Let's click on connect. If this is working, we should start to see all the Mavlink data come across. And if we go into setup, actually let's go into data first. If we just move the cube on the table, we can see it moving on the bench, which is fantastic. So it's flashed successfully. From here on in, it's pretty standard Arduino Pilot stuff. So the first things we need to do is go through each of the mandatory hardware pieces. First of all, we'll do accelerometer calibration. So we need to place the vehicle level and press any key, which we'll click done. We need to place the vehicle on its left. That is the front, so this is the left-hand side. I'm going to put it slightly out of frame, just at the edge of the table. Luckily with a cube, click done. Put it on its right-hand side. Because the cube is so boxy, then this is a lot easier. Let's put it on its right-hand side, click done. Place it nose down, which is like that. Click done. Nose up. Try not to move it when you're clicking done. Put it on its back. Click done, and it's a calibration successful. So that is good news. So level your autopilot to set the accelerator to defaults. We'll just make sure it's completely level. Click calibrate level. Completed. And then the compass and everything else are stuff that we need to do once we've plugged everything else in. But it now means if we go into data, we should see that it's sat reading exactly flat until we kind of move things around and we can see everything moving. Okay, so let's unplug this because we don't never plug in stuff while everything is hot, and we'll start setting up the next bit. So now we have the cube flashed with the basic operating system. It's time to add the other peripherals because we can't calibrate the compass or make sure the GPS is working or do all the rest of the things until everything else is plugged in. Now, normally you would plug in the GPS into the GPS port and other things as well. However, with the latest versions of everything, it's changed a little bit. So what we're using instead is this little board here. This is a little CAN hub. So everything is connected via the CANBus connection. So the GPS is plugging into this little hub, and also the little airspeed sensor, the Maytech digital airspeed sensor, is plugging into this hub as well, and it means that it can drastically reduce the amount of cables that are running around everywhere. That means then all we have to do to connect all this to the flight controller is plug in a single cable into either the CAN 1 or the CAN 2 connection. So let me just pop it into the CAN 1, and that is all the wiring done. It's really easy and straightforward. There is a little bit more involved to enable the CAN bus stuff in Ardu Pilot, and also to tell it that it's a CANBus GPS and also the type of airspeed sensor that it has. But the good news is that all that information and things you need to change is already kind of listed on the manufacturer's site who actually manufacture this stuff. So Maytech and also the here stuff. So let me just plug it into the computer very quickly. And we should see lots of lights flashing now for all this stuff. Everything is powered via the CAN bus. And then what we'll do is we will connect onto the computer, and then we'll see here that it'll get everything done. So we can see here that we have a 3D fix, which is great. That's good as well. And also on the left hand side, we can see the airspeed is changing. So this line here and this here is all about airspeed. So what I'm going to do is let's go and blow into the end of the airspeed sensor, and you should see on the screen this number here on the left hand side change. So if I blow into it, we can see that that number changed. So everything is working and set up, all connected by just those little 4 wires for the CAN bus. So how have I done that? Well, it's actually pretty easy because everything is listed in these websites. So here is the one for the Maytech digital sensor. So we need to make sure that CAN protocol and CAN P1 drivers are both set to 1 and the airspeed type is set to 8. So to turn that on, all we have to do is go into Mission Planner, jump into Configuration, go into Full Parameter Tree, and then we can search for whatever we want over here on the right hand side. So if I just jump back into that, so we're looking for ARSPD underscore type. So if I go in here and type ARSPD underscore type, there it is, it's set to 8. So to change it, what you do is you change it to whichever value you want, hit enter, it goes green, it isn't saved to the flight controller, you have to hit right parameters and say, are you sure? That will then save it back. So for the airspeed sensor, all I've got to do is I've also then got to change the CAN D1 protocol and CAN P1 driver. So guess what? If I look in here and we look for CAN underscore P1, there we go, CAN underscore P1 driver is set to 1, which is what it needs to be, and also the same for protocol. Again, when you change everything, make sure when you hit enter after you put the number in, it will go green, then make sure that you hit right params, then your airspeed sensor will burst into life. Similarly with setting up the GPS. The GPS stuff is all here in the Cube Pilot documentation. There's actually a little bit of paper that comes in the box that comes with the GPS to show you how to do this. All of the settings that you need to set up are here. So you set CAN D1 protocol to 1, CAN P1 driver to 1, GPS type to 9, and you change the NFT LED type. So for example, let's have a look at GPS type. So I've already set this up, so surprise, surprise, if I search for this, there we go, GPS type is set to 9. So that's all I've done. There's only one other thing in here that I've changed. Because there's no arming button on this latest GPS, we need to disable that. But this talks about how you can use multiple GPSs and all that jazz. The last one we need is BRD safety enable to 0, as it doesn't have a safety switch. Surprise, surprise, all I've done is exactly that and just disabled it in here. So I've just worked my way through all the settings on here that the manufacturer says you have to do, and then once you've done that, I would recommend reboot the device. So disconnect from it in Mission Planner, unplug it from the computer, give it 5-10 seconds and plug it back in, and then make sure that everything is working. Once it's like that, now we have the mandatory hardware connected, I can actually do the CANBus calibration, where I would actually connect both the CANBus, which has like a little arrow, hopefully you can see that with the glare. I would kind of connect it to the top of the cube, because that has a little arrow as well, and then go through the CANBus calibration. The rest of it is exactly the same as all of the other Arduino Pilot stuff that you've seen me do loads of different times on the channel. So all you do is just work your way through as you would standardly, or going all the way down here. Now at the moment the Q stuff isn't turned on, and that's one of the last things we can do. We can see here, for example, that we've set it, or it's automatically detected that we have the SPI internal bus, which is the internal one, and then we have the UAV CAN compass externally, and that's flagged as external. I've gone through the process and I've told them that I want to use everything. Now we can change the order and everything in here, but for now, let's go and turn on Q plane or quad plane. So we need to go into config, we need to go into 4-parameter tree, and for this point we need to look for things that start with Q underscore. Now, at this point, we're only going to have one because it isn't turned on. Q enable. What we're going to do is we're going to turn that 1, press enter. We're going to write that parameter. We're going to say OK, and it's going to say this is an enabling parameter. You may need to do a full param press. Basically, I would at this point reboot it. So we're going to disconnect from the autopilot. We're going to pull the plug out of the connection, and then we're going to plug it back in. So we're rebooting the autopilot. So when the Pixhawk comes back and we go and have another look at all the quad plane stuff, we should see some very different stuff. So let's connect, wait for the Mavlink connection to finish. We know the GPS is working, so it says no GPS. It's fail-safing because it's a return to home, but that's fine. That's all in the setup for the radio in a little while. And airspeed is running as well, so that's great. So let's go in config. Let's go into full parameter tree again. And this time we'll search for Q underscore, but we're going to have an awful lot more. Q underscore. We have 150 new parameters. Now, some of these are for particular types of multi-rotor VTOL. Some of them are going to be the stuff that we're going to play with. For now, we just want to turn it on. The reason I want to turn it on is because I want to go into setup and look at the servo output. Now, before we turned on Q plane, we'd have just had the standard AETR settings. Aileron, elevator, throttle and rudder. Those are the 4 main controls that I'm going to need on the model. However, now because we've turned quad plane on, we have 4 additional motors. Now the reason that these are bouncing around, don't worry about that. We just go into data and we change the flight mode to something like manual, and say set mode. There we go, we're now in manual mode. If we go back into the setup, mandatory hardware, and have a look at the servo outputs, they should have all settled down. That's basically because the autopilot was trying to fly a plane. Now, motor 1, 2, 3 and 4 are in these 4. I'm going to move them as Ben did. I like the way that he did it because I need 2 ailerons on this particular model. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, you can got all these wonderful things that you can choose from in here, including the radio control input, so you can pass through things for pan and tilt. So I'm going to reset these 4 motors down onto the auxiliary outputs of the Pixhawk. So there's the 4. I'm going to then make sure that these are all disabled. And now we've got it like that, what we're going to do is we're going to just add an extra aileron. I've got 2 ailerons, they're separate on this seal. Rather than use a Y cable, I will add one in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just add an aileron in here, press A, Here we go. And we're going to end up probably reversing one of these, but at the moment we have one aileron and the other aileron. That's where everything's going to plug in. Now let's just disconnect and reboot this. Come back in and check that's okay. And then we're kind of at the point where we can think about putting the motors onto the seal itself and figuring out where everything is going to fit, because we're a little bit tight for space. We're going to need to put an airspeed sensor in nice clean air as well and do some other stuff. So let's click on connect again, and now it's populated. You can see that again it's trying to fly the plane, so don't worry about that. Aileron, elevator, throttle rudder, aileron, and then we have motors 1, 2, 3 and 4 going into the auxiliary outputs that are numbered 9, 10, 11, 12, but those are the auxiliary 1, 2, 3, 4 outputs. Now I will probably stop it here for this bit. That's probably as far as I would push it, and then we can start setting things up once we have the motors mounted under the wing. But at this point we have the R2 pilot stuff on the Pixhawk. We have everything set up. We're pretty much ready to go. So join me next time. Let's see if we can figure out how to put the motors underneath the wings in a way that isn't going to weigh a ton and be reasonably stiff and work quite well. Thank you for spending your time today watching that video. You can find me in all the usual places on social media, and if you're trying to learn about a subject, then check out the playlist. All of my videos are organized into easy to follow playlists that if you're trying to learn a topic will take you from the basics right the way through to some pretty advanced stuff.